G'day folks, ZD here, a little bit of a first look at, some feedback, and maybe a couple little tips on the new Forbidden Sanctum in Path of Exile 3.20. The first impressions of the league were very good because it's a league that has a new NPC with some very cool voice acting. She's a very cool NPC. It's got some awesome new content, actual features, zones, actual new monsters, and multiple new bosses and mini bosses. So all of that leaves a very good first impression, and it was quite thrilling to discover some of this stuff. Quite like Divinia overall as a character, and look forward to seeing maybe some Divinia cosplay and stuff like that at ExileCon next year.
I'll be the brains. No offense.
Kind of hoping that in some capacity at least this sticks around, but it will probably need a bit of work to do so. So, you haven't been sleeping under a rock or something, this is a roguelike or roguelite mechanic, with some consideration to how you would implement a mechanic like that in Path of Exile. However, while there are some pretty good concepts here and some good implementations, definitely a bunch of it needs work. So the crux of it is this idea that you have this resolve bar, and whenever you take damage from nearly everything in the Sanctum, whether it's these monsters or various traps and things like that, you take damage to that resolve health bar. Now I'm seeing a lot of complaints about the reserve health bar mechanic fundamentally. However, I think that the bar's existence and its design allows this to actually be unique content in a pretty good way. What you'll notice is that there aren't many enemies in the Forbidden Sanctum. There are a couple unique enemies. Sometimes you fold a few of them once, like in here, in this case, for example. But most of the time you're fighting one, maybe two enemies at a time, and all of them have attacks, for the most part, there are a few that need work, that have pretty big wind-ups and very good visual signaling. Now, problems still exist in Path of Exile where the player creates a bunch of stuff that you can't see through, and that's still a problem here, but for the most part, the content itself actually gives you very visible, very evadable, very interactable combat mechanics, and that's just not something that you get. I think without a resolve bar style system, if you just rely on Path of Exile's regular health bar, you end up with Heist. You have a ton of stacked monsters that are doing a ton of abilities to actually threaten that. So you'll notice that the Forbidden Sanctum actually very rarely threatens your regular health bar. I think I may have died once when I had like 30 fire res and I got bonked by a big fire slam. But for the most part, all of the deaths have been chip damage from Resolve. So I don't think the core problem is that Resolve is a bad mechanic or a bad concept. I think that it allows for this to actually be a roguelike style mechanic and have pretty unique content. Quick tip here as well, by the way, pay attention to the missions that you have for each room because you don't actually have to kill everybody in every room. This is an example of a room where you just actually have to find the exit. I am going around to pick up some of the gold because I'm concerned that I won't have enough if I run into a shopkeeper or one of the boon fountains. So I'm picking up a little bit of extra gold, taking on some extra risks, but you can effectively skip over those rooms and just avoid. Usually there's some sort of gauntlet of traps or a layout of a room where you have to explore. So pro tip, you don't always have to kill everything, so definitely pay attention to those. It'll say if you actually have to kill the guards in order to progress. So the resolve mechanic, the issues with it, I think, come into play with a lot of the tuning about specific abilities, and also the question of, you know, our defenses don't work on the resolve bar. So that was a conscious decision GGG made. I'd like to hear a bit more from their perspective about, you know, what sort of testing they did maybe with allowing defensive mechanics to work on it, or if they didn't, or if they from the outset went with this approach. But nonetheless, it does mean that the mechanic inherently, and this is a little bit of a flavor for this entire league, I think, the mechanic inherently punishes slow tanky characters, right? Characters that invest in their character being able to tank damage will have their resolve bar chipped away, and not even just chipped, it completely destroyed by encounters that aren't threatening to their character. And in a sense, that's okay. Not every piece of content needs to be good for every style of character. However, you are getting a lot of different characters and playstyles and players, indeed, who aren't going to be enjoying the Forbidden Sanctum all that much. I think you're going to have the most fun in Forbidden Sanctum if you play a character that is doing something like maybe slowing the enemies, or if you're playing like a very fast moving like I am character with pretty high damage. I didn't have very high damage for a long time, but I've started to get a little bit better damage now. And the mechanic feels pretty nice when you play a character like this. If you really like boss fights in Path of Exile, where the name of the game is always don't get hit, then there's actually quite a lot of fun to be had here, because the execution of that here is mostly pretty good. There are a couple exceptions. For example, there's a guy who flicker strikes. That shouldn't happen. That shouldn't happen in a mechanic like this. It seems very unavoidable. Like, I think there are some ways you can deal with it if you're near the guy at the time when he starts the flicker strike, but a lot of the time he flicker strikes from somewhere where you don't see him, that sort of thing. There's also one of the, I think it's one of the archers that tracks you just really well with its abilities, that constantly chases you around. So you try and teleport to the other side of it or jump to the other side of it, and it still tracks you and shoots you anyway. So that sort of thing needs to not be the case. But a lot of them, you can circle around the enemies to avoid their abilities, or you can dash to the other side of them, or do various things to avoid their abilities. And some of the ability design suites are pretty good. They've got some things that linger, some things that don't. Some of the other problems, I think, that really make the resolve bar get a lot of, like, blame here is things that just do inordinate amounts of damage to the resolve bar. Anything that barrages or multi-hits or shotguns does a ton of resolve damage and feels really unfair. I think anything that has like multiple hits should only be able to hurt the resolve bar once, and there should probably be some sort of like immunity on the resolve bar when you take resolve damage. Maybe from just the specific monster. So example, maybe an archer's doing one of those like Rain of Arrows style skills. You get hit by one of them, your resolve bar is temporarily invulnerable to that monster for just like a fraction of a second. So that you don't get hit 5 times in a row from a barrage like that. Because that sort of stuff, just, you take 100 resolve damage, and it's like, oh, it feels very punitive. And, you know, that's Path of Exile to an extent, things feeling very punitive. You'll see here that even though I have very high resolve bar, I actually opt for the fountain, because every single room in this has, like, an encounter. You don't just go into a fountain room, like in some roguelikes, which actually kind of makes sense, because if you're doing this map by map, you would just walk in, click a fountain and leave, but you always actually get an encounter here. So in this case I have to travel through this room, and you'll notice I end up taking a lot of resolve damage in this room. And I chose the fountain because I anticipated that that would be the case, so thankfully I was able to heal back up to full. Right now my focus has been more on getting to and killing the boss of the first floor than anything else, and I've only managed to do that a couple times so far. It is overall a very hard mechanic. It is very punishing. And in some ways that's really fun. Like I said, if you're playing a really fast, evasive character and you like doing like Path of Exile boss fights, you like playing don't get hit gameplay, then it is a lot of fun in that regard. But it is so punishing. It's very hard. It's very hard on any character that's slow, and this is a very fast character, you know, for leveling. What are we, like level 60 at the moment? Very fast for that level. But most, you know, not all characters are that. Not all players want to play that way. And I think this could be a mechanic that's a lot more fun for other people. So there's a lot of stuff I think that GGG can and should fine-tune. And I really hope that they aim to keep this a core feature, that they aim to keep this around, because I think with the work, this could end up being really fun. I think conceptually there's some really good stuff here. And there's also like a lot of cool monsters, a lot of cool mini-bosses, with just a little bit of polish. Could overall be a really cool addition to the game. So a couple other things to know if you don't already know. These Accursed Pacts, you can take multiple of them. I don't know if that's intended, but sometimes it's actually worth taking multiple of them. In this case, it wasn't. But I do get a whopping boon of 50% more damage, which at this point is a lot of damage, and you'll see that come into play a little bit later on. But we have a little bit of a look at the Accursed Pact boon here, and I'm like 50% more damage for some of my top resolve. That sounds pretty good. I'm a little bit hurt anyway. So pretty good trade-off overall. So do keep in mind that if you're like, hey, I haven't kind of unlocked some things, how do you get the relics? Because those make a pretty big difference. Some good relics can make a pretty big difference. I've got a relic for enemies take 5% increased damage, and now with that 50% more damage, we're doing a lot of damage in the Sanctum, right? Like, I'm killing things way faster. And that makes taking less resolve damage a lot easier as well. There's a really bad curse there, by the way, that removes your minimap and gives you 90% less light radius. It's already pretty dark in here, but the removed minimap in any of those rooms where you could like find the exit, actually going to be brutal. So even though I really wanted to go to the shopkeeper, and I almost have enough gold to kind of make it worth it actually, but yeah, I can't do that. I can't do no minimap. It's too much. I play looking at the minimap way too much, so I don't take that one. The shopkeeper, by the way, see, that was an example right there. The barrage hit me like 5 times in a row, doing just so much resolve damage. And that kind of reminds me as well, like I was just thinking like the regular white monster adds as well, they do so much resolve damage as well. Like I feel like those guys should be doing like 3 resolve damage when they chip you. Just like pressuring, just gently sanding down that resolve bar. Like maybe these things slams, maybe they do 10 resolve damage, but I think they do way more than that. It feels like those things do way more resolve damage, and any of the barrage stuff is super, super punitive. So definitely I'll need a lot of polishing work on just how much resolve damage you take from these things. And then the fundamental question of like, should defenses play a role in protecting resolve? I would like to know from GGG's perspective what problems there are with that concept, because it does feel very punishing that like any investment you put into armor or evasion or any of that stuff, or even health, doesn't help you at all in here, right? So you're very encouraged to be fast and be glass cannon. We're coming to the boss fight as well here, and I just want to say that the boss fight is, the first boss fight, I've only seen the first boss so far, is very well done. The flame breath is a bit punishing again, like it grinds down that resolve bar pretty well, but it is very avoidable, and all of the attacks have excellent wind-ups. I actually regret killing this boss too quickly with the massive damage that we had. But there's very good signaling. Only at the very last like 10 or 20% of the health bar is there like a randomish mortar attack that it's doing there. And that is outside of melee range, which is really nice as well. So overall, really cool boss. Sorry I killed it a little quickly there, actually, because it is a very nice boss fight. And you can actually very easily do that fight if you have even just a little bit of mobility. Even without movement skills, just walking around it very, very reliably. So excellent work on the boss there. I hope they're all up to that standard. And I think that's like an example of like this working very well. That boss wouldn't work in core Path of Exile, right? That boss is too easy for regular Path of Exile. But for the resolve bar, you know, any damage you take from that is very punishing. So having extremely good signaling and everything, very cool. Very cool. I get to do like one floor of the second one here, because weirdly when you store, by the way, you can store by clicking the bottom left button, if you don't know. Whenever you go into a map and get an encounter, you walk in, click the book, click the bottom left button to store it. You can store 8 of them. It's weird that you can store 8 though, because you have to go into another map to activate it. So that means you do 9 encounters in a row, which is 1 floor plus 1 room. Very strange. I don't know why they didn't do it like store 7, so that you could do, you know, your 7 plus 1 and do an entire floor. It's weird that you do 1 floor plus 1, and then in the next map you do another floor plus 1, and then you're like 2 floors ahead. Very strange little thing. Anyway, not a big deal. But it looks like things are definitely going to be getting a bit spicier as we go deeper into the floors. I look forward to seeing it. I get prepped there. Yeah, pretty rough. Pretty rough. But still, it was a pretty good run until those last couple rooms where we took a lot of resolve damage from some of the barrages and things like that. But after that fact, it wasn't too bad. The boss went very nicely and everything like that as well. Took a bit of damage at the end when I was trying to like not DPS it. But some very mixed opinions right now. I'm seeing a lot of people not having much fun with it, and that's because the damage being put out by some of the monsters to the resolve, I think, is super punitive. There's a few other things as well. There's so many curses, and a lot of them are really, really rough. I feel like there should be a lot more boons floating around as well, a lot more blessings. A lot of roguelikes that I play and enjoy have a lot of blessings that you get. You get a new blessing, you know, every other zone or every other encounter, or certainly very frequently. And that's what kind of like most good roguelikes, I think, have a point where you get like a combination of blessings or artifacts, or if it's deck builder cards, that allow you to start doing some ridiculous stuff and start being very powerful. And there are some pretty powerful major boons, but they're very scarce. You don't run into them a lot. If you're still struggling to get through that first floor, you're probably barely seeing any. And I think that should be a bit more liberal with some of those blessings, just to make this a more fun mechanic overall. It feels like you're just stacking curses most runs, and which means that it's just getting harder and harder rather than you getting more and more powerful to deal with the challenges you're encountering. So I'd definitely like to see like more blessings going on. Maybe that's something that could be balanced out. And definitely a pass over some of the different monsters' designs in terms of how they track their abilities. barrages, and get rid of anything like flicker strikes or instant targeting stuff, because that definitely doesn't have a place here. Thankfully, there's not too much of it. I've only seen like 1 or 2 skills that kind of fall into that category. But a lot more to explore. I've only seen 1 floor, and we're only leveling at the moment. But there are some first impressions and some first thoughts. Make sure you do go to Act 2, talk to the NPC in the town, very easy to miss. Then go into Fell Shrine to do the quest. That's how you unlock your relics, by the way. And again, talk to her in Act 7, and do the quest for her in Act 7 as well. You have to find the Forbidden Sanctum in Fell Shrine, and that unlocks the Accursed Pacts as well. I did forget to mention that earlier, but a lot of people have been confused about how you get the Accursed Pacts and how you get the relic table. Also, if you're already in the middle of a run and you unlock the relics, you can't place a relic in the table. You can't like activate its buffs until you start a new run entirely. So you can either just start a new run or just finish the current one. So anyway, that's some thoughts. Hope you enjoyed them. I'm Ziggity. Thanks for watching.